Good evening again and welcome everyone. My name is Laura Castillo, Public Participation Specialist for the Office of Environmental Equity with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, also known as DTSC. The purpose of this information session is to provide you with information about the lead acid battery recycling investigation and cleanup program, also called the LABRIC program, and the proposed reasonable certainty designation for the area at and around the former Berg metal site. As part of this session, we will discuss the public notice and resources we mailed out in early November. As we welcome you, we know there will be some terms that you're not familiar with. We have provided this slide as a reference to the acronyms we will be using throughout tonight's presentation. Please note 3 of the listed acronyms. DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control. LABRIC, Lead Acid Battery Recycling Facility Investigation and Cleanup. RCD, Reasonable Certainty Designation. Meeting materials are available in print at the sign-in table and online at www.dtsc.gov/Berg-meetings. On behalf of the department, we thank you for joining us. We are happy that you are in attendance this evening, and we understand that some people will not be able to join us right now. For that reason, we are recording this public information session to be posted to the Berg Metals webpage for later viewing. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, make comments, and for answers after the presentations during our Q&A session. Due to our limited time together, we may not be able to get to everyone's comments or questions tonight, but we will provide you with our contact information so you can connect with us afterwards, and we will respond to you directly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Next slide, please. The LABRIC program information can be found on our DTSC LABRIC program webpage. We encourage you to visit the webpage and contact the LABRIC program team with any questions you have. To receive updates and continuous informational emails on the LABRIC program, go to our DTSC LABRIC webpage and subscribe to our e-list at www.dtsc.gov/e-lists. Once you're on the page, just scroll to the LABRIC program and you'll click the subscribe button. For media questions, please contact Elizabeth Leslie Gassaway at our DTSC Office of Communications. Her email is elizabeth.leslie-gassaway@dtsc.ca.gov. Here's a review of our agenda. Next. Our meeting continues with opening remarks from Todd Sachs, our Deputy Director of DTSC's Site Mitigation and Restoration Program, followed by presentations on DTSC's LABRIC program, including background and status of the Berg metal site by Igo Shu and Peter McNichol. After the presentations, we will cover the public notice and public comment period related to this site. The Q&A will be where we spend most of our time together tonight. Our goal is to answer any questions you have about the LABRIC program, its process, or about the Berg metal site and what it means for you as a community. We will include some next steps on what happens after this meeting and what to expect during the hearing on December 19th, the public hearing on December 19th, where formal comments will be accepted both orally and in writing. Next slide, please. Now we welcome Todd Sachs, our Deputy Director of DTSC's Site Mitigation and Restoration Program, and Serlene Grant, our Deputy Director of DTSC's Office of Environmental Equity, to provide opening remarks. Todd?
So thanks and hello. My name is Todd Sachs. I am the Deputy Director here, so I'm responsible for the work that we're going to be talking about today. How many of you are residents or live in the area? So thank you for coming tonight. We're all here for you all. And we appreciate your coming here. I know it's a lot to come to a place like this. So thank you. We're here because we're talking about a particular site called Berg Metals that operated in the early 1900s through 1958. But because of the type of business it was involved in, it also had the impact of releasing lead into the environment. And so we're here in part because there was a program that was set up that establishes a fund for us to be able to evaluate, investigate, and then potentially, if needed, do work to help clean up the impacts that that facility had in the past. So that's why we're here today. And again, really appreciate your coming. If you'd like to talk with me after the meeting, just please feel free to come up and introduce yourself. And that would be great. So thanks and welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Serlene Grant, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Environmental Equity. And what that means is I have a group of people, myself and a group of people who are responsible for public participation, for organizing meetings such as this one, for environmental justice and equity, which is making sure that many times people who are most excluded from a process are indeed included. And many times communities that are the most impacted by industry or by a development project or a number of things, an airport, a number of things that impact the community often aren't consulted. So we on behalf of DTSC and the California EPA consult with communities. And then I also have tribal affairs, which also is a community of people, a government, a nation of people who have often been neglected when it comes to a lot of development throughout the state of California. So that's my role. And so while Todd and his crew will be doing the technical explanations of how things are cleaned up and where the situations are, we're here to represent and be a conduit between you all, be you residents and neighbors or industry, and the people who are doing the technical work. That's primarily what my department does. And so I'm here this evening, as we all are, to hear from you and to learn from you. This is my first time to Vernon. And as I was driving in, I was like, wow, okay, this is Vernon. So we learn from you and we want to hear from you. It's a unique place and we want to make it sustainable so that it can always be Vernon and contribute to the economy. But we also want it to be a Vernon that is responsible to the neighbors and the communities around it. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing your questions and talking with you. Like Todd, I'll be here afterwards if there's more to want to hear from us more.
Thank you, Serlene. Our first presenter is DTSC's Labrick Program Supervisor, Go Shu, out of our Sacramento Regional Office. He will be providing an overview of the Labrick program. Our second presenter is Peter McNichol, the Berg Metals Site Project Manager, also from our Sacramento Regional Office. He will present the Berg Metals site background, a history of the site, fund eligibility, and the status of the investigation and the proposed reasonable certainty designation and sampling results. At this time, we will begin our first presentation by Go Shu, Supervising Hazardous Substances Engineer and DTSC's Labrick Program Supervisor. Go.
Hey, Laura. Good evening. Thank you for attending this informational session this evening. I would like to start my presentation by sharing DTSC's mission. The mission of DTSC is to protect California's people, communities, and the environment from toxic substances, to enhance economic vitality by restoring contaminated land, and to compel manufacturers to make safer consumer products. DTSC's mission includes protecting people who are potentially exposed to contamination caused by the operation of lead-acid battery recycling facilities. The lead-acid battery recycling facility investigation and Cleanup or LABRIC program was designed to investigate formal lead acid battery recycling facilities like Berg matters, which Pete McNichol will go over in more detail during his presentation. Next slide, please. So the LABRIC program process begins with identifying potential lead acid battery recycling facilities. We identify them by using certain search criteria like secondary smelter and lead smelting found in various databases or informational sources. Once a potential lead acid battery recycling facility is identified, it undergoes a site screening process. During the screening process, DTSC scientists and engineers will review available evidence and information to determine eligibility for investigation and site evaluation using the Lead Acid Battery Cleanup Fund. We refer to it as the fund for short. The fund is financed by fees placed on manufacturers and purchasers of lead acid batteries. If a site is eligible for fund use, it will be prioritized for investigation and site evaluation. In this case, Berg Matters was the first site found eligible for use of the fund money for investigation and site evaluation. Once the investigation and evaluation is complete, DTSC will review the investigation results to determine whether the contamination is reasonably certain to have resulted from the lead acid battery recycling operation. If the answer is yes, the site is eligible for use of monies from the fund for cleanup and other response actions. If the answer is no, there is existing contamination still on the site, DTSC will refer the site to an appropriate agency or program for their oversight. Next slide, please. So I will describe LABRIC program site process, including background information on DTSC's LABRIC program and the California legislation, which authorized and directed the creation of the program. The LABRIC program was created by DTSC to implement the Lead Acid Battery Recycling Act of 2016, which we will call the Act from now on. So the Act provides the legal framework for our mission to identify, investigate, and clean up any area in California that was contaminated by the operation of lead acid battery recyclers. This legislation calls for fees of $2 imposed on purchasers and manufacturers of lead acid batteries for each battery sold at a retail. And these fees are placed into the Lead Acid Battery Cleanup Fund, or the fund for short. It should be noted that the largest number of these batteries are automobile batteries. The LABRIC program is authorized to use monies from the fund to perform a limited number of specific activities. These activities involve two major components. The first component is the investigation and evaluation of areas in California reasonably suspected to have been contaminated by the operation of lead acid battery recycling facility. The second component is the cleanup of areas that have been determined with reasonable certainty to have been contaminated by the operation of a lead acid battery recycling facility. DTSC may seek cost recovery from potentially responsible parties for the monies DTSC spends for investigation and cleanup of sites eligible for the use of the fund. In order for an area to meet the requirements for using money from the fund for investigation or site evaluation, two primary threshold questions must first be evaluated. The first question is the facility a lead acid battery recycling facility within the definition provided in the Act? The second question is there an area of the state that is reasonably suspected to have been contaminated by the operation of that facility. If these thresholds are met, DTSC can use monies from the fund for an investigation and site evaluation of the area. Following the investigation and evaluation, and for an area to meet the requirements for using monies from the fund for cleanup, DTSC must make a designation that a site has been determined with reasonable certainty to have been contaminated by releases from the operation of a lead-acid battery recycling facility. Reasonable certainty shall be established based on all reasonably available information, including information provided by the public, to conclude that the contamination in a specific area was from the lead-acid battery recycling facility. And this informational session is part of the designation process for the Berg Metals site. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the main purpose of this informational session. We want to provide you with the information that explains why Berg Metals was chosen for screening, why it has been investigated, and why it is being proposed for designation. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Peter McNichol, Senior Hazardous Substance Engineer and the Project Manager for the Berg Metals site.
Thank you, Igo. Appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time and participation tonight in this informational session concerning the Berg Metals proposed reasonable certainty designation. As Igo stated, I'm the project manager for the Berg Metals site. A little background on me. I've been in the LabRIC program for a little over a year, but I've been with DTSC for over 22 years, overseeing and managing numerous cleanup projects. I've directed cleanup work at several US EPA Superfund sites, state Superfund sites, including state orphan sites. Most recently, I was DTSC's lead remediation project manager for a multi-million-dollar contract to clean up the town of Greenville, devastated by the Dixie Fire in 2021. Tonight, I would like to talk to you about a number of matters related to the investigation and designation process for the Berg Metals site. I will be discussing the site history and background. I will be discussing the eligibility process for accessing monies from the fund, investigation and the site evaluation, the soil sampling results, the proposed Berg Metals reasonable certainty designation, and the proposed reasonable certainty designation area, also known as the RCD area. Next slide, please. The site was developed for commercial industrial use sometime prior to 1906. Berg Metals Corporation operated a secondary lead smelter at the site between 1937 and 1958 for the smelting of lead materials to make hard or antimonial lead. Records indicate that lead acid battery recycling operations at the site ceased in about 1958 when the business dissolved. Next slide, please. Soil sampling conducted in 1990, 2009, and 2014 showed elevated levels of lead exceeding DTSC's residential soil screening level of 80 milligrams per kilogram remaining in site soils. DTC recorded a land use covenant in 2018 that restricts the use of land to prevent exposure to the high levels of lead that still remain in on-site soils. Currently, the site is covered with large warehouse storage structures and pavement. Next slide, please. Based off the evidence summarized in the site screening report, the LabRIC program concluded that the site was a lead acid battery recycling facility, and that the LabRIC program reasonably suspected that an area of the state was contaminated by the facility operations. This allowed the LabRIC program to utilize monies from the fund to investigate and evaluate the area. On January 13th, 2021, LabRIC program initiated the Berg Metals investigation and site evaluation. In June of 2021, the LabRIC program and its contractor finalized investigation work plans for soil sampling at the site and in public parkways located within 1 mile of the site. During the 2021 and 2022 calendar years, the contractor collected soil samples both on-site and off-site as part of the investigation and site evaluation. In June of 2023, the Berg Metals lead acid battery recycling investigation facility and parkways reports were finalized. The facility report contains on-site soil sampling information, and the parkways report contains off-site soil sampling information collected in public parkways within 1 mile of the site. Next slide, please. As shown earlier, the lab work program has broken down the eligibility process for accessing lead acid battery cleanup funds into 4 steps. Upon concluding that the Berg Metals site is a lead acid battery recycling facility and reasonably suspecting that an area of the state was contaminated by the operations of Berg Metals, the lab work program determined that the area at and around the Berg Metals site was eligible for use of monies from the Fund for Investigation and Site Evaluation. This is represented by the second step shown in the slide. On January 13th of 2021, the lab work program provided public notice of the initiation of the investigation and site evaluation of the area at and around the Berg Metals site, including the parkways located within public right-of-ways. Other than the site, DTC did not collect soil samples from locations other than in public parkways. Next slide, please. The soil sampling results from the investigation are summarized in the Berg Metals facility and parkways reports. Those results showed that lead concentrations exceeding the DTSC residential soil screening level of 80 milligrams per kilogram is present on the site and in surrounding shallow soils in the public parkways within the proposed Berg Metals reasonable certainty designation area. It's important to understand that other than the site, DTC only collected soil samples from public parkways. The RCD area is discussed in more detail in a subsequent slide. Sampling results indicate that further investigation within the proposed Berg Metals RCD area is necessary to determine impacts to private individual properties as well as other properties, and to determine whether remediation at any of the properties is appropriate. If the lab work program finalizes its designation, further sampling will be needed on private and other properties within the currently proposed RCD area. Next slide, please. Under the Lead Acid Battery Act of 2016, DTC has provided the public with a notice and an opportunity to comment on the proposed designation of the area at and around the Berg Metals site. That the RCD area as having been determined with reasonable certainty to have been contaminated by releases from the operations of the Berg Metals facility. The proposed reasonable certainty designation is an important step in the lab work program process. If, following the end of the comment period, DTC finalizes its designation, DTC may access funds to address contamination from releases from the Berg Metals site. Slide 19, please. Next slide. Yes. Okay. The map shows the proposed Berg Metals RCD area within the dotted line. The center of the site is located where the X is shown in the center. The proposed RCD area is bounded by Compton Avenue to the west, East 21st Street to the north, runs through East 22nd Street, East 27th Street, connects with Ross Street, and then heads south to East 37th Street and is bound to the south by East 41st Street, my bad. The RCD area includes homes, businesses, parks, schools, and some industrial buildings. I will be handing the presentation over to Lisa now. She's going to talk about the public comment period and the upcoming public hearing. Next slide.
Thank you, Peter. Good evening. My name is Valisa Moss, Public Participation Specialist with the Office of Environmental Equity with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. On November 3rd, the Department of Toxic Substances Control mailed a packet of information to the community within 1 mile of the Berg Metals site. The packet included the Berg Metals public notice, a community letter, and resources on how to reduce exposure to lead in soil. The documents are all available on the DTSC Berg Metals webpage, along with a link to the LA County Public Health webpage on lead safety. This information is available at www.dtsc.ca.gov/Berg-meetings. We encourage you to review this information in full to help you decide on how to best protect yourself and your family from lead exposure. Next slide, please. When DTSC publishes a public notice, sometimes we set aside time for the public to review the publicly available information and send to DTSC for formal comments. We call this the public comment period. The public notice for the Berg Metals proposed reasonable certainty designation includes a public comment period, which lasts from November 4th through December 19th, 2023. DTSC will consider and evaluate all public comments as it considers finalizing the proposed designation. Next slide, please. All the information DTSC used to propose the RCD is available for review. There are 3 ways to access that information. 1, you can visit the DTSC EnviroStore database found online at www.envirostore.dtsc.ca.gov. We have included a QR code that takes you directly to the page, but you can also search by the site name Labric, LABRIC/Berg Metals. Number 2, you can view the documents in person at the DTSC Cypress Regional Office by calling Ms. Julie Chandler for an appointment at 714-484-5337. Lastly, you can also visit the Vernon Public Library. No library card is required to view public documents, but we recommend you call just to make sure that they are open. The number is 323-234-9106. If the designation is finalized, it will also be available to the public at our website and at the DTSC Cypress office in Vernon Public Library on or before January 12th, 2024. Next slide, please. Public comments on the Berg Metals proposed reasonable designation may be submitted via mail to Jerry Dietrich, DTSC Public Participation Specialist for the Labric program at 8800 Cal Center Drive, Sacramento, California, 95826, or by email at labrf@dtsc.ca.gov. Comments can also be made during the online public hearing on December 19th. The public hearing will be the only time that oral comments will be formally accepted onto the record. Again, all written public comments must be received or postmarked by 11:59 on December 19th. Next slide, please. The public hearing for the Berg Metal site will be held virtually on Zoom with simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. You can register online at www.shorturl.at/AB J7. You will receive a confirmation email with instructions on how to join online or by phone. If you would like to participate by phone using Spanish-only audio, dial 877-779-6711. Enter code 184-787-9#. Because it will be a formal public hearing, the format will be different than tonight's meeting. The formal public hearing will include presentation of facts about the Berg Metal site, followed by a short time for clarifying questions before the hearing officer officially opens the hearing for public comment. During that time, the public can provide their comments, but no responses will be given. Next slide, please. At this time, we will now open our public comment period for questions focused on the Labric program, Berg Metals, and lead exposure precautions. We understand that the Berg Meadow site is within a few miles of the X-Site cleanup project area. If you have questions related to the X-Site only, please take a card found at the registration table and submit your question to any DTSC staff member or call the X-Site information hotline at 844-225-3887. Questions clarifying the distinction of the two sites are welcomed. Although people are welcome to share their thoughts, no formal comment will be recorded tonight. Please keep comments to at least 2 minutes to allow for all individuals to have a turn. You may raise your hand to speak again or multiple times after, allowing others to have a turn. Once your hand is raised, you will be asked to approach the podium to ask your question or say a comment. As I mentioned in the previous slide, formal comments can be made at the hearing on December 19th or via mail or email. Our Q&A panel for this evening includes representatives from DTSC's Site Mitigation and Restoration Program, also called SMRP. The LABRIC program is a cleanup program within the SMRP. The panel this evening includes Igo Shu and Peter McNichol, whom you've met during tonight's presentations. They're also joined by Stephen Becker, Branch Chief, and Mehdi Betahar, Assistant Deputy Director. We will now take questions up until about 7:25 p.m. You would raise your hand and Laura will direct you to come up and answer your questions. All right. We will now open the floor for questions. Any questions? Yes.
My name is Susie Ybarra. I'm a resident of Vernon. I just have two questions. If this isn't the forum to ask them, that I'm fine with that. The first one, I'd like to understand why there's only a 1 mile radius that they select to review. And two, how does contamination from this company get spread through the environment?
Peter?
Yes, I can go ahead and try and answer that question. The Berg Metals reasonable certainty, well, I should say the Berg Metals study area that was 1 mile in diameter, if you will, that was selected based off of I think the best way to describe the 1 mile would be the fact that we believe that was something that was representative of the potential impacts from the site based off the former operations. The former operations, as I'd mentioned, was a lead smelting facility, and those operations were known to emit unagglomerated fumes, lead fumes. So essentially particulate matter in the form of hot gases that would escape through the stacks, become airborne, and then through aerial deposition would, fall out of the atmosphere and then come in contact with the topmost soil. Does that answer your question, ma'am? Okay.
Public parkways.
Those are parkway areas and public right of ways. There, if you look at if you happen to have a chance to look at the reports, if you have an opportunity, they show areas to the west, if you will, of Long Beach Avenue, I believe, that were parkway areas within public right of ways. So that's essentially what the areas that were sampled.
Peter, can I add some clarity? I think what the woman was asking is, what is a parkway? A parkway outside your front of your house, you have, or your apartment, wherever you live, you have a sidewalk. That's usually about 2 squares. And then you have a little piece that might be some more squares, or might be some grass, or it might be some flowers that looks like it's yours, but it really belongs to the city or government. It's usually an easement, and that's the parkway.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let me add a little bit. The main difference of parkways, the planting areas in the public right of ways. it's not just pavement. So that's the main reason we choose parkways, because we can collect those soil samples without breaking the pavement.
Hi, so I personally live about 0.7 miles away from the site. I just looked it up, and we have a lot of like trees and fruits and stuff. My question is, first of all, where can we find the results of that report? Like, I want to know, did they do a study to see if the contamination decreases as the diameter goes further? And then also, it's interesting because you said it's been closed for quite a while. And so are we still susceptible to the lead contamination, and has it dropped through the years? And then what is your plan to chelate it out of the soil?
I'm sorry, could you maybe, you had like 3 questions there, as I think,
Yes.
right? So maybe we could work on the first. We work on the first question there. So the first question was,
So, okay, the first one is, where can we find the reports so we can look at the details?
so perfect. The reports are available online on our EnviroStore database.
Okay,
And actually, if you use the, I believe what,
The
you guys
QR
helped me with
code?
yeah, QR code, right. That will take you to essentially our online repository of all the documents that are available. And the facility and parkways reports are online, so you can look at them and, you know, rummage through them and provide feedback if you like.
okay, great. And then the second one was, in the study, does it show the decrease of the lead contamination based on diameter? The further you go, and when does it stop, you know?
Right. And so what I can say is that the area that we looked at, the study area, if you will, that was just, you know, that was already predetermined. So what we were able to do was, within that one area, we were able to look at the data from both adjacent or in the near proximity to the site and then farther out. So what we generally saw was a dissipation in concentrations away from the site. So as distances increase away from the site, the lead concentrations decrease in concentration, generally speaking. And yes, that's so that it supports certainly the information that we received on the site and the type of operation. So it corroborates that information.
So did you see like a fine line, like after 0.7, it was like close to nothing, or?
I can't necessarily see there's a definitive, deposition and aerial extents, but generally we saw patterns and overall, broad sense responses of the data in terms of generally decreasing trends farther away from the site. And also, we also found that lead concentrations generally decrease with soil depth. So the topmost soil adjacent to the site or close to the site is more impacted than that soil farther away and even deeper, in depth.
And since it's been closed for so long, we are still above the higher,
The concentrations right now are exceeding the DTSC residential soil screening level of 80 milligrams per kilogram. And that's what we kind of use as a benchmark, if you will, for determining whether there's additional response actions that can be taken.
Okay, and then the last question is, what's your plan to clean it up or chelate it out?
Well, first things first, our main priority here is to be able to finalize the RCD designation. Without being able to finalize the designation, we will not be able to utilize monies to do further investigation and assessment of those contaminant impacts. So that's really our first priority, is to be able to get this approved. So therefore we can collect more information and make those determinations at that point.
Okay, and thanks for doing that because this is important.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Is there anyone on the panel that would like to add to that?
The second question I want to add a little bit. Actually, the second question, you can find more comprehensive answer from the report. There are 2 reports, one called facility, which means just for the Berg Matters property itself. And the other one called Parkway report, that's just for anything off-site is in all the samples collected from the parkways. That report have various analysis, and one of the analysis is as Peter mentioned, is just a general concentration trend with distance away from the site. And Peter basically said in general is a decreasing trend, but it's not the same rate. That's why you don't see something, as you said, to certain distance rapidly dropping. We don't see that. Just in general, it decreased, but in certain area, specific area, it may not, but overall it decreased.
So I'll just add a little bit more. So I want to make sure that we're not being, I get it. I want to make sure that we're not being unclear. So when we did the study, right, we saw the highest concentrations near where the facility used to be. And lead's a metal. So once it falls out, it never goes away. You would have to actually physically remove it to have it go away. And so we saw the highest concentrations within about 1,500 feet of the site. And we saw different metals together that led us to think that it was coming from where the former facility was. And so that's why when we showed the map on the slide, that was why we chose that specific area as the area of focus. That being said, we also did see lead in the community outside of that area. That's not uncommon. There's lead present in soils across the state, especially in communities that are older, that have houses that used to have lead paint in them, that might be near freeways where gasoline used to have lead in it from like the 1920s to about 1980-ish or so. And so the lead that came out of gasoline actually fell out onto the soils as well. And then in addition, you have impacts from industrial facilities. So the lead concentrations are significant even outside of that area. And that's why when we're saying like there are things that can be done to help reduce exposure to lead and help protect yourself from exposure, that's why we're talking about that, because I don't want to give you the impression that because you live outside of the area that we designated that everything's okay. What the designation allows us to do is focus on contamination from one source, which is this former facility that used to essentially break lead acid batteries, melt down the lead, and the smelting process resulted in air emissions where it would come and fall out. But this community, like others in Los Angeles, like areas in the Bay Area, and even in Sacramento, all of these areas have lead in soils. And so as an organization, we're working to try to figure out what can we do about that beyond just this program, because it's a significant issue. Lead, as many of you know, has real health impacts on people. And so I think for us, we're just starting to try to figure out how to solve that problem. But part of it starts with this program and trying to clean up areas where we know it's contaminated by a former lead acid battery recycler, and we have the fund that's been set up by the legislature that pays for cleaning it up.
In addition to what you measured from lead, did you look at the environmental impact, what it did to the people surrounding? How many of the people are ill by one thing or another that may have been caused by lead, or did you not look at that?
I can try to answer that. When our work is generally focused on trying to assess at this point how much lead is in the soil. There are other agencies that look at public health impacts. It's not something that our department is particularly good at. And in order to see those types of impacts, because the types of like cancers, for example, to look at, those are relatively rare. And so looking at a relatively small area, like the area on the map we showed, we're not likely to be able to see something that's mathematically significant enough to be able to determine that that was caused by the site. And we're talking about lead that's been in soils since at least 1958, because that was when the site closed. So we're not talking about something that's happened recently. So the way in which lead can impact you is, for example, if there's lead in the community and then it's tracked into the house and it becomes part of the dust in the house, then you can be exposed to it if the dust gets on your hands and you inadvertently ingest it, for example, you eat it or swallow it. But that's actually a much less effective exposure route than it would have been, say, in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, when people were actually breathing lead from lead that was in the air from gasoline. So a lot of the impacts that would have been much more severe before than they are today, but it's still important to try to figure out what the impacts are and do what we can to make sure that we address the lead in soils, address the public health exposures as best we can, and try to make sure that the site is protective for people living in the communities going forward.
So can I add, Todd, that maybe another part of your question, you're saying, have we looked at other things, is that we don't work in a vacuum?
Right.
While we are responsible, I know it sounds like, okay, we're only responsible for the dirty dirt, but we don't work in a vacuum. We also work with public health. We also work with the air resource boards. So while we're doing our work, there are other agencies aware of what we're doing. So we're not working in a vacuum. I just wanted to share that.
¿Hay preguntas en español?
Yo hablo puro español. Es que yo vivo en la 22, en la 1774. Y yo vivo en la 22 Street.
I live on 22nd Street in 1724.
Al lado del 1770 empacan muchas baterías ahí.
And next to us on 1770, they're packing a lot of batteries there.
Y toda la 22 es llena de baterías y tiran aceite ahí. Y al filo de mi casa se agarran a tomar, inclusive todos los días de la noche a tomar.
On 22nd, there's a lot of people throwing batteries and also dumping oil. And in the corner of my street on 22nd, there's a lot of people that even go there to drink.
Y nosotros hemos hablado a la policía, pero nunca llega.
We've called the police, but the police never comes.
Y toda la 22 es lleno de baterías que compran. Hay motores, transmisiones, pero más baterías.
All 22nd, there's a lot of batteries that are being bought there. There's also engines and other automobile parts, but it's mostly batteries.
Y mi esposa últimamente está sufriendo muchos dolores de cabeza porque inclusive usa unos inhaladores por los dolores de cabeza.
My wife has been having a lot of headaches recently and she uses inhalers and the headaches are pretty strong.
Y eso es todo lo que pasa ahí en la 22, pero nunca llega la policía. Ahora ni la barredora llega ahí.
That's happening on 22nd and the police department never comes and sometimes not even the street sweeper comes.
Porque ese está lleno de camiones que nunca quitan los camiones de ahí. Y las barredoras ya ni se olvidaron de llegar a la 22.
There's a lot of trucks that park there and don't move from the place. So the street sweepers don't even come to that area anymore. There's a lot of contamination. And all the oil, it's a lot of quantities that are going down the drain. And that's all. There's a lot of trucks that are in that area, and those are the trucks that are there.
Can you please ask which city it is?
The city of Vernon.
Thank you.
En la 1770 ahí para
1770 on 22nd.
cargar todo el cuestión de aceite.
There's a truck that carries the batteries and the engines, and the oil is being dumped on the street. A lot of oil, and they just put sand over it.
Cuando llueve todo eso.
When it rains, all that oil is going down the drain.
Se olvidaron de la identidad.
And they forgot about 22nd. 22nd Street. That's all.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Alameda and 22nd.
If there's any illegal dumping that's going on in your neighborhoods, you can call this number. It's 1-888-253-2652, or you can email dumping@pw.lacounty.gov, and you can call for illegal dumping or email for illegal dumping and provide the address, and then they will come and take care of it. It's 1-888 Clean LA. So that's 1-888-253-2652. If you give them the address or email, if they refer you somewhere else to go.
That's right.
No. Good evening. My name is Freddie Agent. I work for City of Vernon. And I just, I think the address is not in the city, but I will work with the gentleman to see what is happening. Because our police actually very good. If there's an issue and they call police is on there. So I'll give my information. I'm a Health and Environmental Control Department director. So I will see what we can do to assess them. But that location, I think, is in LA. But we'll see how we can help.
Thank you. That kind of problem typically happens between jurisdictions. So thank you for stepping up.
Which brings up another question. Are you proactively looking at battery areas around here or locally for this type of problem, or do you just wait until somebody complains or somebody moves? How does this environment?
Let me try to answer that first. So as we showed our process at the during my presentation, the first step we actually actively identify formal lead acid battery size, and we look at various sources, and of course we use leads from publications, old phone books, the government databases, and it's very, I think that would be very helpful if you, the public can supply some or have some knowledge of some old formal battery dump place or recycling place. That would be helpful. So.
Hi, I'm Janet from Public Health. Do you know about how many homes are in the proposed RCD?
300.
It's the rough number is about 300. Yeah.
Dora Saki, and I'm a little bit away from the site, but I have been receiving these notices. my question is, you mentioned that it is impossible to remove lead in the soils. So my question is, what then is this cleanup going to entitle?
I can answer. No, what I did not actually say you can't remove lead from soils. What I said was that like lead doesn't really go away unless you remove it. So like things, sometimes there are like if you spill gasoline on the ground, for example, microbes like bacteria will eat some of the gasoline over time and the concentrations of gasoline will go down. But with lead is a metal, so it doesn't degrade over time. It just stays in the soil. So the only thing you can really do is either leave it in the soil and break the exposure to it, or you can physically remove it by digging it out. And so, what this program is going to be doing is looking at what is the extent of lead, for example, in the community and potentially in the area we've identified, and potentially even at some of these homes. And if they exceed a certain level, then we'll have to decide what the proper approach is to reduce exposure and or potentially remove lead from the community. Does that answer your question? Maybe not.
It's still, so if you find these, certain levels of lead in in some of the homes, what's going to happen? How is that, I like to
Yeah.
hear a little more about.
Sure. We're a ways away from this, so I don't want to give the impression that any kind of cleanup is going to happen in the near future. But if we get to the point where it's necessary to remove lead from, for example, people's backyards, then what we would do is literally dig up their backyard and replace it with clean soil.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about the impact of our drinking water. Does it affect our drinking water or does it not?
I mean, drinking water comes from municipal supplies that are tested to ensure that they're safe before they're distributed through the water system for people to drink. So lead can impact groundwater at times, but usually the wells that are used for drinking water are pretty deep. So the impacts are generally low, but I don't know if you want to add anything.
You're correct. So basically the groundwater is the main supply for drinking water. And that water, when you look in California, you're going to find it at 100 plus feet. I would say even production wells are installed at 400 feet sometimes. What's happening with this, and I think it was part of the presentation, is the soil that they have found in this parkway is very shallow. You're talking the first 6 inches or 12 inches, but nothing that goes deep enough to impact the 100 feet and beyond. Nonetheless, it's a problem. It's a different type of problem. It's not in the water, but it's exposed right now.
Thank you, Mehdi. Do we have any more questions?
Hi, good evening. My name is Evelyn Nuno. I'm with the Board of Environmental Safety with DTSC. And I apologize in advance. I haven't read the report or the sampling results, but you say that the results are above 80 milligrams per kilogram. What is the median sampling result that you've gotten?
No. I don't know if they have median just for specifically median concentration. I don't know if they have that in front of us.
Let me try to answer
We could probably get that information. We need to just try
Or the average, whichever one's easier.
We did average calculation by zones, by like every 1,000 feet. And in our report, we have that. So it ranged from, because it changes from each zone, because we did a 1 mile investigation. I think if I remember correct, don't just count the exact number. The number inside the first 1,000 feet is the highest. The average, if I remember correctly, is around something like a 600. And then it goes out, it drops, and it drops drops to near the 1 mile zone, drops to about 200 something. So as I don't look at the report, I just based on my memory. So that's in general.
Okay. Would you say that the southern zone that you sampled was the highest?
The designation area is the highest, yes.
Okay.
Anything else?
So I can answer the question. It depends on distance, but the median concentration at, for example, 1 feet below ground surface ranges from maybe about 130. I'm reading it off a graph, about 130 parts per million at within 1,000 feet. And then it decreases to maybe around 80 on a median once you're at 3,000 to a mile out from the facility. So what that means is about when you're outside of that map, your lead concentrations could be as high, for example, as if you're in like and within 6 inches might be as high. If you're within like, well, sorry, it means about half of them are going to be above 80 parts per million at 12 inches deep on average. No, outside of the designation area that we designate.
1,500 foot.
Yeah, outside of 1,500 feet. So the median concentrations are higher, the shallower they are. So at 6 inches deep, the median concentration within 1,000 feet was over 400 parts per million. And when you're out to between 2,000 and 6,000 feet, it ranges somewhere around somewhere around 240, 250 parts per million.
If I may, very quick. The process we're going through today is the process of designation, and that would allow the spending of money for the sampling of the properties. We have looked in the past, not on this site, but other sites where we had sample residences and parkways. And I can tell you that the hardest part is there is no correlation between a parkway and a residence. What you find in a parkway doesn't mean it could be low. It doesn't mean your property is low, and vice versa. You can find a high concentration on a parkway. It doesn't mean that the property is going to be the same. So this step here would allow us to know exactly what's on the properties. And this is why we're here in front of you today, is to make sure that we get the chance to start sampling these properties that are within that 1,500 mile, because the initial sampling that happened on the parkways indicate there's a need for it.
Any other questions? No.
One back.
Thank you again. What kind of precautions are you recommending for the community at this time?
Go for it?
Yes, yeah, go for it.
Yeah. It's, the good thing is that the method for us to get impacted by the lead are immediate exposure, either via, like Todd said, if you get to eat it or get the dust in your mouth or carry it in your hands or your shoes. So we recommend a lot of hygiene. So when you get to garden, which is, I'm talking for myself, I love gardening. So if I end up having lead, I would wash my hand more frequently when I get out. Same for anything that I pull out of my garden, it needs to be washed extensively. So hygiene is recommended.
Okay, so I have received notifications about this in the mail, but there's nothing in regards to precautions to be taking, understanding more what is happening right now. This is something that's, it's been in the soil for a long time, but I think it would be important for the community to know that, certain precautions need to be taken now. We can't wait until, I don't even know what the timeline is when you're going to start doing all this cleanup. But I think the community needs to have the information, at least to take some precautions. I'm sure a lot of people go out there and work in their gardens, in their yards, and they don't know the extent of the contamination. But if they were informed, at least they would know to take precautions, to be more diligent. So we need more information.
Well, we're happy to provide more information, and if you have suggestions for how to do that, we're totally willing to try to do. But what I will say is, we sent a letter out to everybody who lives within 1 mile of the site, and part of that letter included information about how to protect yourself from lead exposure, including things like Mehdi was describing, washing hands, potentially taking your shoes off before you go into your house, washing vegetables if you're growing them in your yard, that kind of thing. So it was included as part of it, but your comments are well taken. We definitely want to get the word out that there are things that you can do to help reduce your exposure to lead, because like I said, this isn't something that is unique to this area. It's something that's happening all over California.
Thank you.
You're here because we're close to the facilities. Have you done any testing locally to see if it is deeply in the soil in this area? I mean, why are you communicating? Why are you here unless you think it is impacting the city of Vernon?
Maybe I can start with the answer. The main reason why we're here is to obviously solicit input and feedback from the public for our proposed designation, because one of the things that we have to do in order to consummate and finalize that is to get public buy-off and approval from this, if you will. And so what we're trying to do is to try obviously notify the public about our intentions to further evaluate the impacts. And the first way for us to do that is by finalizing our designation so we can tap into those monies to allow us those efforts. So that's the first thing we're trying to do. But we are going to learn more information as we go out and we further assess and sample these areas that we believe are impacted. So we'll know more information. We everything what's currently within the Berg RCD area is going to be essentially looked at as first, if you will. That's what we've designated the area as. And if upon our investigation and assessment of those areas, if we have information that shows that the contamination is farther past the area, then certainly we would be looking at expanding those areas and obviously evaluating those impacts. So that's we're kind of starting in a small area, if you will, and our goal ultimately is to continue those investigational efforts and to figure out what the impacts are in the community.
Well, I have to tell you, it was very frustrating when we had Exide and they were telling us that it's only that side of the city and it's not this side. It could never be this side, but yet nobody came out to test. So we have that contamination we're dealing with. And now with the bird contamination on top of that, if you don't go out and check maybe more than what's there, because I'm here next to the city. And you're here and you're giving us the information and you're presenting it to us, but how do we go out and see if our city is impacted? Unless you go beyond that 1 mile radius that's listed in this thing. It's not like the air stops at 1 mile and then falls. I mean, we just get contaminated. I don't see the full action.
Understood, ma'am. I think the biggest thing to understand is that what we do is a process. There's a phases to it. And we have to work through this process in order to get to the point where we can actually make, headway in terms of remediating something, cleaning something up. And so ultimately, that's where we're trying to get to, but we have to be able to check these boxes off as we're going along, because we won't be able to make it to that point where we'll be able to take action. So that's really what we're trying to do, is notify you that we do believe there's a problem. We want to further assess it. We want to investigate it. And based off of those results, we will make the determination what's best, obviously, to protect human health and the environment. Yes, further investigation. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Well,
No.
I'm not saying the whole city of Vernon.
Right now, are you going to investigate this part?
Okay.
So let me take this question. So I want to start off by saying that the reason why we're focused on the immediate area within 1,500 feet of the facility is because lead concentrations are highest within that area. Right, and because it was there, and second is because when these facilities operate, the way when you have air emissions that come out of a site like that, they dissipate like a cloud the further away you go away from the source. So we would expect the concentrations of lead from that facility to be highest. The LABRIC program is designed to focus on legacy contamination from former lead acid battery recycling facilities. It is not designed, and we don't have the funding to be able to look at this point, lead contamination from lead paints or lead from gasoline in the same way that we have the ability to look at lead from former lead acid battery recyclers. That does not mean we aren't concerned about it. We absolutely are. And there's a lot of discussions happening at the state level right now for us trying to figure out how do we get our arms around this problem, because the arguments, I hear your frustration about Exide. And by the way, I'm responsible for Exide in the same way I'm responsible for Berg. We're doing a lot of work around Exide. The work around that site is unprecedented. And, we're getting close to having, cleaned, essentially remediated 5,000 homes, which means we've essentially dug out people's backyards and replaced it with clean fill. It's incredibly difficult and I would say traumatic for people who live in the area. And even then, as big as the Exide area is, there are folks who are making the same arguments you are, that hey, I live outside of the PIA and there's lead in my home. What are you going to do about it? And the answer at a state and local level right now is we don't have programs to deal with all of that yet. So what we're trying to figure out is how do we get our arms around the problem, because you literally cannot dig up all of Los Angeles. There have to be better ways to deal with this that are less intrusive and less damaging than what's done, for example, around Exide. We're working on that, but it's going to take some time. We're here today trying to take a different, hopefully a different and better approach than some of the impacts that happened early on with Exide. We're coming to you early. We're trying to explain what the issues are. We're going to make a formal designation. And then we're going to conduct additional analysis to determine if additional cleanup in the community is necessary. But we have a long ways to go to solve the problem you're identifying. And that's just what's happening.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you. Thank you, madam. Thank you, Freddie.
You're gonna have a seat up here next time.
Okay, we have another question.
Hi, my name. Hi, my name is Victoria, and I work at one of the local businesses. I didn't realize that the letters that were coming in the mail meant that we were only a mile away from Berg or the other company. I don't know much about any of those companies, but it was kind of interesting when you guys mentioned the lifting of the dust. I work next to Express Disposal, and they are like a transfer station that kind of minimizes trash from the area. So I wouldn't say that I'm particularly in Vernon, but based on the letters and receiving them, I guess I am within a mile. Yeah, the area. And I think it's very interesting because there is a lot of dust lifted in the air. It kind of, and with that lifting and the quakes from that particular like transfer or disposal station, I would say that it's more of a concern. I guess the lead being lifted up and like put into the environment of the people working. Particularly in my, like in our own, for our own company, I've like looked into it a little bit further. And because of the zoning, it's like manufacturing or industrial. The zoning allows for like I guess disposal use. But we don't really know where the items are coming from that go to the disposal station or what they can fully contain. Because when you think about it, like a lot of things that go to the trash, even if they're one type of material, there is always the possibility of other materials to be mixed into that. And I don't know if that's like something to consider in addition to what's already being discussed.
Peter?
I'd be willing to just say this, and it goes to the gentleman had spoken earlier with his wife who had had some health concerns. First of all, I wanted to say we certainly, empathize with your health concerns with your wife. And, one of the biggest things we'd like to articulate to the group, and I think, we have some local representatives here in the audience, but the biggest thing, if anyone believes that they have an immediate health risk, they should be contacting the local public health officer, because that's really the first line of this response, is to be able to assess those impacts or those risks. And those would be the first people that would be doing that. So if anyone really does have those concerns where they believe they have an immediate health risk, please contact your local public health officer, because they should be the first ones that should be, assessing anything there and obviously recommending or making corrective actions, whatever it might require. So, I mean, that's the first thing, but you're right. I mean, any of these particular activities has potential to mobilize lead that's possibly in the soil. I mean, but obviously we don't know any of these impacts until we actually have site specific information. And so that's what we're really trying to do, as I mentioned, by doing this additional sampling, is to figure out specifically where it is and how much. And that's certainly the next step that we're trying to get to.
So I have reached out to like multiple, like from South Coast Air Quality all the way to Sacramento and with their people. And there has been testing done. However, we don't really get the results to that. Like it's kind of like closed off unless like we're Express Disposal and we're getting fined, or we're the truck going over there creating the emissions. And only when there's a fine or only when there's like an issue, then do they reach out to those people directly. But then from there on out, the community doesn't get the resources to understand what the severity of the reoccurring issue is.
We're all reacting. We just haven't had a statement.
Todd or Serlene?
Yeah, I can, well, go ahead and then I'll take some.
So I'd be happy to give you my card. We do have a complaint line for businesses with our environmental health department. So maybe I can work with you directly, because it sounds like this is maybe not a health issue, but maybe a compliance issue with the business.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd be happy to talk with you about both. Yeah, I can talk about blood lead testing. Public health, we've been fortunate enough to have some partnerships and funding available to offer free blood lead testing. And so really the only way to know if you've been exposed to lead is through a blood lead test. but it does have some limitations. So, it's not like a historic look at exposure. It's, what you've been exposed to maybe in the last month or two. And we have flyers with us. We have a 1-800 number that you can call, and we have a list of Quest labs that offer free blood lead testing. So we'll be happy to give you this flyer. It's in English and Spanish, and we really try to make it as easy as possible. The results come to the public health department, and we have nurses that call the participants to give them the results. And if there are any elevated levels, then we work with you on what next steps are. Anything to add? Okay.
Thank you.
So my other question is, how do we get our soils tested if we wanted to? Is there some kind of services like what hers offer, but for our own property?
I'm sorry. We currently do not have a program for testing individual site soils. The individual site properties, will be tested within the Berg area as part of this expansion, if you will, of the finalization of the designation, the ability for us to tap into those monies and to further sample and assess those impacts. We'll be able, we will be going through that process as through the phases, if you will. So main thing for us is to be able to get the designation finalized, and then certainly we would be coming with a plan of attack, if you will, a plan, if you will, a cleanup plan, talking about what we would be doing on these various properties, sampling. And so obviously part of that would be getting access to properties and to be able to do those things. But that's all part of this next phase after the designation is finalized. So that's something where we are leading to, but we don't have something off to the side, a separate program that is outside of the designation process that is doing those particular activities. That helps you at all.
If I may, very quick, you're right on point, but just as a clarification, your question is, what do I need to do? And the answer is nothing at this point, because if the process goes well and the designation is confirmed, that would give us access for us to call you and schedule an appointment, ask you for an access agreement. And this is what we have been doing on other sites, is really proactively reaching out, trying to get an access agreement and sample those properties as quickly as feasible. So that's going to be on our end. If you live within that area, within that designated area, someone will reach out to you as soon as the funds are approved.
Anything else last minute? Not, Valisa's gonna take it away.
Thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions and comments. The next steps in the designation process is for DTSC to hold the public hearing on December 19th and consider all the public comments received during the public comment period. Once DTSC finalizes or revises the proposed designation, updates will be made to the Labrick Berg Metals webpage on the EnviroStore database and the 2 in-person locations, the DTSC Regional Office in Cypress, California, and the Vernon Public Library. We encourage you to subscribe to the Labrick Program e-list. This slide shows a QR code that can take you directly to the subscription page, or you can go to the webpage on slide 29. At this time, Todd Sachs and Serlene Grant will provide closing remarks.
Oh, we will. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to stick around and have and talk with you individually about any particular concerns you may have. And am happy to hand out my card, and if you want to contact me later, that's great too. I just want to, this is going to be a process, so we need to go through, make the designation, and then we'll be taking steps from there. So there will be additional sampling in the community. We'll have to figure out as we move forward what more is going to be done. But so this is really the start of the continuation of a process. But again, really appreciate you being here tonight. Hopefully we can answer any questions you may have. So feel free to reach out to us after the meeting and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to echo Todd and say thank you. And on behalf of everybody who worked to put this on, and I want to thank the city of Vernon for allowing us to have this public hearing here. It's always one of our biggest challenges is to find a meeting place that people are familiar with, that they will come to, because we want you to get this information. And it's really difficult. As I said, my role is to make sure there's public participation, public outreach. And so on behalf of your neighbors, I thank you for being here so that you can go tell your neighbors and your other people that you interact with and your different clubs and groups and so forth, what's going on, because that helps build the interest as well. And so I thank you for your questions and for letting us know what this environment is like, i.e. the lived environment, the gentleman with the situation next door to him. We wouldn't know that if you all didn't come and tell us. So this is why these kinds of meetings are so important. So thank you all for being here.
Righty. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Serlene. That is all the time we have. We encourage you to contact us with any questions we were not able to answer tonight. Thank you again for your questions and your comments. Thank you again to the City of Vernon for allowing us to use your facility for our elaborate program, Berg Metals meeting. Our meeting is now adjourned. For now, we'll say goodnight. Please enjoy the rest of your evening.